Be sure to give this video a thumbs up, share your insights in the comments below and subscribe to keep up with our most captivating stories. Little never could I have foreseen being trapped in the depths of the unknown, in the shadows of uncertainty where two souls collided, grappling with feelings neither of us had anticipated. Lucian. The one who knew him best. The one I feared the most. His presence was like a ghost from another life, a haunting silhouette cloaked in the darkness of memories I had long buried. He came often, his visits draped in unease. He and my husband exchanged hushed words and laughter that echoed hauntingly through our living room. It was the kind of laughter that left the walls cold. I watched them with my heart pounding, the truth clawing at the fragile fabric of everything I thought I knew. In a heartbeat, it all began to unravel. And then, he vanished. The silence that followed was not peaceful. It was deafening. Still. Unnatural. Until a knock shattered it. Sharp. Unexpected. Lucian stood at the door, clutching forgotten documents, eyes wild like a storm barely contained. The rain behind him poured like it meant to wash the world clean, violent, relentless, unforgiving. The house seemed to recoil in his presence. Silence took on a new shape, dense and oppressive, wrapping around us like smoke in a burning room. We sat across from each other. No words passed. Only secrets floated between us, invisible and undeniable. He leaned in close, but not too close. His eyes searched mine as if trying to read the spaces between my thoughts. "Are you happy?" he whispered. Such a simple question. So delicate. But it landed like a thunderclap. I couldn't answer. The silence between us wasn't empty, it was crowded. With doubt. With fear. With some quiet recognition that neither of us dared name. That night, as he fell into a restless sleep on our couch, I covered him with a blanket. A simple gesture. And yet, in that moment, it carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken things. My hand trembled as I tucked the edges in. He shifted slightly, his breath catching. A fleeting moment. A heartbeat suspended in time. In the days that followed, I couldn't stop watching him. Every visit, every glance, each second thick with something I couldn't understand, something I wasn't sure I wanted to understand. His presence was like a crack in the foundation, subtle but undeniable. With every encounter, the air grew heavier, the moments stretched longer, and the silence screamed louder. A tension crackled between us, not born of desire, but of some emotional reckoning neither of us could yet define. "Is happiness just an illusion?" he asked again. I wanted to scream yes. But I said nothing. My silence was a betrayal. Of him. Of myself. One evening, his hand reached toward mine across the space between us. I froze. The breath caught in my throat. My body did not move. My heart pounded so loudly I was sure he could hear it. I didn't take his hand. But I didn't pull away either. When did his eyes grow so cold? That question haunted me. Had they always been? Or had I simply never dared to see it? That night, Lucian arrived late. Later than ever before. I expected him to take the documents and leave, as he always did. But he stayed. The rain tapped against the windows like a warning, each drop a memory, a moment, a thought unspoken. The television flickered, casting ghostly shadows across the room. We sat in that dim glow, the weight of unvoiced truths pressing down on us. Again, he asked me. "Are you happy?" The words struck harder this time. I stood there, unable to answer, unable to breathe. The silence roared in my ears, louder than any sound. He leaned back slowly, eyes never leaving mine. We were suspended, held together by something invisible but unbreakable. I turned, almost mechanically, and fetched a blanket from the hallway closet. The air was thick with unease as I placed it over him once more. My hand brushed his as I adjusted the edge. A jolt, not of thrill, but of recognition. Like finding a mirror in an unfamiliar room. I pulled away. Fast. Too fast. But when I looked up, his eyes met mine. And in that look, everything changed. It was not romance. Not longing. Not even friendship. It was truth. Raw. Wordless. Heavy. I should have walked away. I told myself to turn back, to run, to let this be another forgotten evening lost to the silence. But I stood there. Frozen. Not by fear, but by the weight of something deeper. Lucian breathed slowly, his presence fragile yet impossible to ignore. He stood there, still, quiet, unassuming. But around him, suspicion hung like a thick fog. And then, I understood. He was not the storm. He was surviving one. As I once had. I fled the room, my feet barely touching the ground. The kitchen lights were off, but I found the chair in the corner and gripped it like a lifeline. My breath came in short bursts, hands clenched, nails digging into the fabric as if anchoring me to something real. Nothing would ever be the same. The air had shifted. The world had tilted. And no matter how hard I tried, I knew, deep inside, that something had awakened. Something I could never unsee. Just one. A smile, a fleeting joke. Could it have altered the course of everything? But no, there was no laughter left. Only silence. Only the breath between two hearts unwilling to betray their pain. Yet unable to contain it any longer. Lucian stood as if suspended in time, his eyes no longer cold, but hollow. And in them, I saw something that struck me deeply. Fear. Not of me, or of the consequences. But of himself. As if he had wandered too far into a space he no longer recognized. As if he were afraid of the parts of himself he had tried so long to bury. I wanted to speak. But my voice was lost. Caught between guilt and clarity. Between the life I had built and the person I was slowly discovering underneath its weight. The room, though filled with nothing but stillness, seemed to roar with unspoken history. And then he moved, just a fraction. A sigh, a shift of weight. The simplest of gestures, yet it felt like 1,000 words. He looked down. And in the space between our gazes, everything changed again. I turned from him. Not in rejection. But in fear of how much I needed to understand myself again. This wasn't about Lucian. Not truly. It was about me. It had always been. I stood in the quiet kitchen that night. Hands trembling as they wrapped around a cooling cup of tea. Steam rising like ghosts. Memories whispering behind every cupboard door. The light above flickered, just once. And in that flicker, I imagined a life unlived. One where I had been brave enough to ask myself what I needed. Before it came to this. Days passed in a haze. Lucian did not return. Neither did the questions. They simply lingered. Like the scent of rain long after the storm had gone. My husband returned from his trip. His voice warm, his presence familiar. He kissed my cheek as if nothing had changed. And maybe to him, nothing had. But for me, everything had been rearranged. Not by Lucian. But by the stillness. By the silence that forced me to confront the hollowness I had ignored for far too long. I watched him as he spoke of work and weather and things that once brought me comfort. And I smiled. Not out of joy. But out of mourning. For the woman I once was. For the pieces of her I now had to gather and reassemble. One afternoon, I opened a drawer filled with old letters. The kind written in the early days. Full of dreams and tiny, hopeful lies we tell ourselves. And I wept. Not because I missed them. But because I had grown so far from the person who believed in them. I do not know what Lucian meant to me. I only know that he held up a mirror. And in it, I saw not a version of myself I wanted. but one I needed to understand. His absence now feels as loud as his presence once was. And in that silence, I rebuild. Every morning, I open the window. I breathe. I sit with the ache, the confusion, the raw edges of becoming. And somehow, in that stillness, I am not afraid anymore. That night, the storm roared to life, battering the windows with a fury that seemed to echo the turmoil within me. The wind howled like a warning, dragging through the trees like a spirit denied peace. Inside the house, shadows danced along the walls, thrown by the flickering light of a single lamp. The storm was relentless, but not as relentless as the thoughts clawing at the edges of my mind. Lucian sat motionless on the sofa, his silhouette etched in stillness. He was there, yet unreachable, a presence both comforting and disquieting. The clock ticked on, each second a heavy echo in the quiet between us. My hands trembled slightly as I poured a cup of tea, the steam curling like ghosts from the past. I placed the cup before him without a word, and for a moment, he didn't move. Then, slowly, he looked up, his eyes met mine. They held a depth I wasn't prepared for. "Thank you," he said softly, his voice nearly drowned by the wind outside. I nodded, afraid that any word from me might rupture whatever fragile calm still tethered us to the ground. But the silence that followed was no less deafening. It held the weight of questions unanswered, of decisions left unmade. He held the cup, untouched, as if the warmth would somehow burn him. I sat across from him, unsure whether to speak or simply exist in the hush. Then he said it again. "Are you happy?" This time, the question was quieter, less a probe, more a lament. A whisper of someone who already knew the answer, but needed to hear it aloud. I opened my mouth, then closed it again. The truth hung like a stone in my throat. How do you measure happiness when your heart is buried under the years, when you no longer know where the sadness ends and the stillness begins? "I don't know," I finally said, my voice barely audible. "Some days I think I am. But most days, I just exist." He nodded slowly, staring down into the untouched tea. "Existing isn't living." "No," I whispered. "It's not." The storm raged outside, but inside, a different kind of storm brewed, quiet, unyielding, impossible to escape. I looked at Lucian, this man who had walked into our lives like a whisper and become a shadow I couldn't ignore. I thought of my husband, of the years we built together, of the laughter, the routines, the quiet compromises. And now, of the silence between us, one not born of anger but of distance. Lucian stood slowly and walked toward the window. His hand rested on the frame, watching the rain cascade down like tears the sky could no longer hold. "I never meant to cause any of this," he said. "I came here to help with work. I didn't expect to see you." That last word lingered. Not in a way that declared anything grand, but with the subtlety of someone who had stumbled into something they never sought. "You didn't do anything," I said, standing too. "You just reminded me of something I forgot. That I once felt alive." He turned to face me, and the look in his eyes was filled not with desire or expectation, but with sorrow. "I shouldn't stay," he said. "I know." He walked to the door and opened it, pausing as the cold wind rushed in. He looked back once, not with longing, but with understanding, and then stepped into the night, the rain swallowing him whole. The door clicked shut. And I stood in the quiet that followed, every breath a thunderclap in my chest. I was not broken. Not yet. But something inside me had cracked, and the light that had once dimmed was flickering again, not because of Lucian, but because I had finally looked inward. Because I had dared to question what happiness truly meant. The storm eased by dawn. The house was still, wrapped in that post-rain silence that feels like forgiveness. I brewed another cup of tea, sat by the window, and watched the world wake. Tomorrow would come, as it always did. And with it, the choice to retreat into what was easy, or step into what was honest. And maybe, just maybe, that would be enough. I braced myself, aware of the storm that had already begun to stir in the quiet corners of my world. Each day with Lucian felt like walking a tightrope above a sea of unresolved questions and unseen depths. The space between us became a landscape of silence, too loud to ignore, too fragile to break. Even the simplest things, like the way he stood at the threshold of the living room or the way his eyes lingered a moment too long, carried a weight I couldn't decipher. The air between us shimmered with everything we couldn't say. Each unspoken word hung heavy in the space, like dust in a beam of light, visible only when stillness forced you to notice. I tried to carry on. I cooked. I cleaned. I smiled. But it was as if I were acting out someone else's life, one where I had to pretend the truth hadn't already begun to unravel. Lucian remained distant yet impossibly present, like a memory that refuses to fade. Even when he spoke to my husband, his voice barely louder than a whisper, I could feel the shift, the careful cadence of someone carrying too much. His words held a strange sorrow, like he too was haunted by things left unsaid. One afternoon, as golden light streamed through the windows, I caught him standing at the edge of the garden, his gaze fixed on nothing. The breeze tugged at his coat, and for a moment, he looked like someone lost in time. I watched from the kitchen, unable to move. There was a fragile beauty in that stillness, a silent scream beneath the surface. Later, when I opened the door to call him in, he didn't turn. His voice came soft, distant. "Have you ever stood so still you thought the world might forget you existed?" The question lingered in the air, cutting through me with more power than I expected. I didn't answer. I couldn't. Instead, I stepped back, letting the door creak softly shut behind me. That night, sleep eluded me. My thoughts looped endlessly, weaving between guilt and longing, confusion and clarity. Days turned to weeks. Lucian kept visiting, his reasons more obscure, his presence more loaded. He helped with the garden. Shared short, quiet dinners. Never once crossing a line, and yet the line itself seemed to fade with every passing day. My husband remained oblivious, immersed in business trips and late meetings, leaving shadows behind where laughter used to live. One evening, I found myself sitting across from Lucian, a cup of tea growing cold between my hands. We weren't speaking. We didn't need to. The silence had grown so familiar it had become a language of its own. Then he said, barely louder than the ticking clock, "You don't have to keep pretending." My throat tightened. My hands trembled. I looked at him, really looked, and for a moment, the room dissolved. There were only truths, raw, painful, silent. "I don't know who I am anymore," I finally whispered, voice cracking under the weight of honesty. "I wake up and wear a smile like armor. But I haven't felt like me in years." Lucian nodded, his eyes clouded with something unspoken. Sometimes we get so good at hiding that even we forget where we buried ourselves. Tears welled in my eyes, but I blinked them away. "Why do you come here?" He didn't answer at first. Just looked at me, then down at his hands. "Because," he said at last, "you remind me that I'm still human." The room fell silent again, but this time it was different. The silence no longer choked, it breathed. It carried the weight of shared loneliness, of two people caught between the past and something they couldn't define. The next day, I found a note folded neatly on the edge of the kitchen counter. Lucian's handwriting, careful and deliberate, "I won't be coming back. Not because I want to leave, but because we both need to find ourselves in the quiet again. Thank you for seeing me, even when I couldn't see myself." I stood there for a long time, holding the note, the house so quiet I could hear the hum of the refrigerator. A wave of sorrow washed over me, but beneath it was something steadier, stillness, not emptiness. The storm had passed, and in its place was a strange kind of peace. That evening, I sat alone in the living room. The TV played softly, but I wasn't really watching. I looked at the chair where he used to sit and smiled, softly, wistfully. I wasn't sure what came next. I only knew that I had changed irreversibly, quietly. Some part of me had woken up. And even if Lucian never returned, I would carry that awakening with me. Not as a wound, but as a reminder that even in the silence, we are never truly alone.